the key to unlocking your divine identity, mastering executive presence, and leading with unwavering confidence was hidden within the life of one extraordinary individual. Today, we're diving into the transformational journey of David Richards, a man whose story rewrites the definition of resilience, leadership, and spiritual awakening. From surviving a near-death experience in childhood to leading Marines in combat for over 15 years, David's path didn't stop there. Now he's a corporate powerhouse at Cisco, shaping customer experience and coaching top executives. He unleashes their full potential. But David's true impact transcends boardrooms and battlefields. He's the #1 international best-selling author, blending biblical wisdom, neuroscience, and leadership strategies to inspire thousands to awaken their divine identity and live a faith-purposed life. In this conversation, we'll uncover key areas that David helps solve. Reclaiming executive presence. Learn how to lead with authentic confidence. Faith-driven purpose. Discover how to align your career with your divine calling. And transformational leadership. Elevate your influence from the inside out. Are you ready to rethink success, rediscover your purpose, and ignite the leader within? Great! Together, live spiritually brave. I'll see you on the inside. Hello from the Pacific Northwest. This is Kristen from KristenWambach.com, and you're listening to Interviewing Jesus podcast. Answer me this. How does a Baptist farm girl from Oregon stumble upon the mystical nature of Christ, the love of God? If you're like me, Jesus has redefined what you used to say yes to. Join me and my guests on a mystical journey. But before we talk about the spiritual woo-woo, you need to know I am totally sold out to Jesus. It's amazing what the love of God reveals. Hello and welcome, family. I have a treat for you today. David's story is a testament to resilience, leadership, and spiritual growth. A former Marine Corps officer for 15 years of service, he's now a corporate leader at Cisco, focusing on customer experience and an in-demand coach specializing in executive presence and transformational leadership. His guidance has elevated leaders at top financial and IT firms like Fidelity, Microsoft, and Cisco, boosting their leadership and communication prowess. But David's impact isn't confined to the conference room. He's a #1 international best-selling author, inspiring individuals to awaken their divine identity and embrace their faith-driven purpose. With a unique mix of biblical insights, neuroscience, and leadership strategies, David invites us to rethink success, faith, and personal growth. Prepare for a stimulating conversation. I have my questions ready, and we will be encouraged to unlock our divine identity, master executive presence, and lead with unwavering confidence. Hello and welcome, David Richards.
Wow, what an introduction. Kristen, thank you so much for having me on. What a thrill to speak with you. After that, I'm excited now. That's
Woohoo!
talk too.
Yes. Actually, in our little pre-chat, I forgot to tell you my maiden name was Richards.
No kidding.
No kidding. Richards, and my dad's family was based out of the Chicago area. So if you have Chicago family, they
No, I was going to say my dad is from Iowa, from a little postage stamp town called Greenfield, Iowa. So not too far outside Chicago.
That's a whole nother story, all the way from Chicago. But yes, I was Christy Richards for years and years.
Cool. Might be related. I'm going to have to check that out. I used to have a 23andMe membership, but they went bankrupt, so I scrubbed it, but I wondered if we were related. So
That would be interesting because my dad's father, who came west, he was considered a black sheep, so all of the connections got lost, and yeah, which is interesting. Okay, let's ask all those really good questions that our listeners are wanting to know.
Sure.
So you have had an extraordinary journey.
Thank you.
From surviving a near-death experience as a child.
Yep.
And then you dedicated your service in the Marine Corps. I'm kind of attracted to Marines. You know, I married one and my oldest son was a Marine. And so they just kind of, I get drawn to them.
Sure.
So thank you so much for your service.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then you also excelled in the corporate arena. We are curious, what was a pivotal moment when you realized it was time to carve a new path for yourself?
Great question. So I grew up in the military. My father was in the Marines for 31 years, and it's such a different style of life. Growing up on a military base, everyone wears the same uniform, the houses look the same, people all go to work the same. It's almost a throwback. I mean, growing up, imagined being on a military base is what it was like to grow up in the 50s in the United States, because no one locks doors, crime is negligible, and I mean, everything's on base. So I loved the comfort and familiarity that it brought. At the same time, I started to feel disruption because we moved every 2 or 3 years. And this was well before the internet, well before your texting. And so I would make friendships, and then those friendships would be torn apart. And it's not like I'm going to see these people again. And we spent 3 years in Japan when I was a kid, from fifth through seventh grade, and that was transformational. And I was very successful in writing in school. So in high school, I got something published when I was in 10th grade. My poetry won contests, my art won contests, and that was kind of my vibe. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And I sort of had these dreams of going to Hollywood and either starring in movies or writing movies or doing special effects for movies, because I was enthralled with the art of cinema. And then at the same time, I think today it seems like there's a pipeline for that. If kids want to go into movies, you can go and learn all about that. In the 80s, you couldn't do that. And so I had no idea how to function in the real world. I got to Penn State on a military scholarship. And even though I was an English major, I kind of knew that I was going to just join the Marines and see where life was going to take me. And I graduated in 91, was commissioned. A year and a half later, I'm storming the beaches of Somalia as part of the initial landing force for Operation Restore Hope. And it was amazing. I mean, you're doing this stuff, and I was 23 years old, leading Marines in combat, and it was extraordinary. But I was still moving. And that went on for the next, 15 years. And really, I think the pivotal point, it'll be funny, but in 2000, I started writing poetry again. And in the Marine Corps, that's a weird thing. Like, you don't see a lot of Marines writing poetry. And so my fellow friends and officers kind of raised their eyebrows, like, are you normal? Like, what's your... And that was when I started to realize I am living my dad's blueprint for life. Like, he did 31 years and when I got a corporate job in IT, and that was the mindset that I had. And when I started writing poetry again, it kind of lit the spark of creativity in me that had been subdued or, maintained or leveled off for much of my military career. And I would say in 2000, 2001 was when I began to think that I don't need to live this life. Like, I can get out. And then I made the decision to leave in 2006.
It was interesting because my husband in the Vietnam era, and then my oldest son, it was that blueprint that we followed. They actually ended up in each of the duty stations. It was uncanny.
And it's so in the military, I mean, that's the other thing too. There's only a certain amount of spots, especially in the Marines. There's only like 20 or 30 bases in the world for Marines. And so, I mean, I went to Quantico, Virginia, I don't know how many times. It's the crossroads of the Marine Corps. And I started out in artillery, and my dad had been infantry, and I didn't want to like be in the muck. So artillery is kind of glamorous because you get to destroy stuff, but you're still driving trucks and riding trucks everywhere. Um, but then halfway through, or like 5 years into my career, I said, well, what am I going to do when I get out? What are you as an artillery officer in the civilian world? How does that even translate? And my dad had been infantry, and then he switched over into what was called data systems at the time, which became IT in the military. And I said, well, I'll go IT like my dad did. So it was very much I'm just going to follow in his footsteps because I saw where it got him, and that seems like a logical choice. And then in the early 2000s, it switched.
Well, on a personal basis, what were your call to actions that helped you to respond to when you decided to make that change? What kind of frameworks did you put into action?
Yeah, so a couple things. One of the driving factors was I'd been married and divorced, and I had a daughter from that marriage and was disenchanted. My parents had a beautiful marriage, even through all those moves. My mom was from Pittsburgh, and like I said, my dad was from small town Iowa. And that was a very important part of my life. But I realized with the transitory nature of being in the military, it's very hard to meet someone knowing that, okay, I'm going to be moving in 2 years. So let me try to get this relationship to the point where this person is willing to drop their life and follow me wherever I go next on my career. And so one of the things was I wanted the chance to stabilize my life by geographically sticking to one place for more than 2 or 3 years. So that was a big marker. When it came to what I wanted to do, I was in IT, but it wasn't like programming computers. I mean, I was in it from a military standpoint, and I was also at that point a mid-range officer. So my training was a little bit different. But I think that was one of the other things I looked at was, well, what can I do? And I had the good fortune that I had earned 2 master's degrees on active duty, and both of those were specializing in how to kind of master the art of warfare. There was someone from my class or from that one of the schools who had his own business, and he ran a security detail out of the Middle East. And so I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I could be a mercenary. Yeah, it was kind of like this swashbuckling, and there was this kind of romance to that idea. But I also realized if I do that, I will never have the stability that I want, because that kind of lifestyle doesn't have a lot of stability to it. So I thought, well, what else can I do? A friend of mine who I'd served with was in a defense contracting company outside of DC, and he said, I can get you a job here. Or I went to Cisco because we worked a lot with Cisco, the giant networking company. I said, well, Cisco's like huge. Like Cisco's got to be a good place. So I wanted to do something that was going to keep me close to the military, and I got put in contact with someone who supported Cisco's military customers. I wanted stability by looking for a place where I could live and hopefully get in a relationship with someone that didn't have any experience with the military. And I think that part of it was I knew that when I stabilized my life and wasn't going to be moving, that there might be a window of opportunity for me to start writing again. And I think those were kind of the things I looked at. And in terms of my preparation, it was, the military offers classes on transitioning veterans, what it's like in the civilian world. It's not the best resource for understanding what that's like. In fact, I would say most big companies like Cisco, Microsoft have veteran onboarding programs now that can help veterans coming out to orient to, this is what civilian life is like. This is how you sort of fit in and blend in, because civilian culture is so much different from military culture.
Yes, it is. It is. My eldest brother retired warrant officer, something Army, and he literally walked across the street from the base to a corporate office to do the same thing that he did in
That's awesome.
the Army, and he's still doing it. So he builds and places generators all around the world to support their radar and everything.
Okay.
So yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. I wanted to show, I have a little bit of a cheater here, people. I picked up one of David's book, Whiskey and Yoga. So The reason why I got this one is because my husband is very fond of whiskey. Actually, most of the men around me and my sons are, but I beat him to the punch as far as reading it. I have a couple of quotes and segments that I pull from there that we can jump off of. So on page 17, it says, as we get older, something changes. We say goodbye to our imagination, and we do our best to embrace the reality of everyday life. We find happiness in snippets. Happiness becomes a pursuit and something we have to chase. Why is happiness evading us?
It has to do with the imagination. I mean, if you think about when we were kids, I remember this memory just came to me, but I remember for one Christmas, and I was fairly old, like I would say baby daycare, like like 4 or 5, maybe kindergarten. But my brother and I for Christmas, I don't know what we got, but we went outside with one of the boxes because we got magnifying glasses and the sun was out. And so we started burning holes in the box because it was like, and it's so fun. What ends up happening as you get older is you start to pay less attention to the internal world and you start to focus and fixate on the external world. And especially in this day and age now, where we are bombarded with information. I mean, growing up, there were 4 television channels. When we lived in Japan, there was 1 American television channel. Now there are people that have millions of followers on YouTube and they have their own YouTube channel. Streaming, I mean, it's overpowering. And in that sense, if you constantly look outside yourself, then you're constantly looking for something outside you to satisfy yourself. And so we pursue happiness. If we remember that happiness is an internal game and that everything we already need is already within us, it becomes different because now it's about what am I broadcasting out into the world? What am I sharing with the universe? How am I connecting with other people through the spiritual authenticity of my being? And that becomes a completely different paradigm instead of me compulsive shopping or compulsive drinking or binge eating or binge watching shows or constantly doing silly and ridiculous things so I can get likes and follows on Instagram or TikTok or wherever the case may be. When you reset and realize that it's all inside, like your sense of being really comes from inside you, and what you choose to feel and what you choose to think about, those are choices that you get to make every single day. Sometimes we forget that because we become so fixated on what's outside of us.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Great answer. Obviously, that you shared how poetry came back alive to you again. There was something in your imagination that reminded you and it turned on that love and that affection that you could start writing down and experiencing the detail from the words and the creativity of it. How would a person first evaluate themselves and then re-cue in their imagination?
The simplest way I can think of is to journal. And I'll give you a little bit of a story. So when I got out of the Marines, it probably took about 2 years where I was assimilating into corporate life and what it meant to be on this side of the uniform. But I also realized, oh my gosh, like I'm not going to move anymore unless I get another job or choose to leave and go somewhere else. And it was so exciting. So growing up, I loved Stephen King horror stories. I loved Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I just loved the horror genre because just the fact that you could get that kind of emotional reaction by a book or a story to me was riveting. And so I wanted to write horror stories. And I couldn't get them going. For 11 years, I tried to write horror stories. And I'd write about like 110 pages. And I would just write on weekends because the work week was so busy. And after 2 or 3 months, it would just fade out. The characters were flimsy and I'd get so frustrated and I'd leave it for a year. And this went on for 11 years. And then when I finally shifted to say, well, I'm going to help people find their purpose in life with whiskey and yoga, now it was like, okay, now I have to share the ugly, messy parts of my life and turn it into a message so people can be helped so they don't have to make these mistakes. They can like, oh, I don't want to do what this guy did, or this guy did this thing that's really good. I still didn't feel like I was a writer though, because it was such a laborious task. And shortly after I published Whiskey and Yoga, I got a book called Writing Down the Bones. And I think the author's name is Marianne Williamson. And in the book, she says one of the things you want to do to overcome the internal editor within you is grab your phone, set a timer on your phone for 4 or 5 minutes, grab a pen and paper, not a computer, but a pen and paper, set the timer off and just write. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about margins. Don't let the pen come off the page. And I thought, that's so ridiculous. That's such a silly concept. And so I said, I'm going to do it. And the first sentence I wrote after the timer went off was, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. When the timer was done, I had 4 pages that I'd written. And I was blown away. I was like, where did all this come from? And it was amazing to me. We take it for granted to a large extent that because we learn how to write at such an early age, that we can do it at any time. And yet, if you talk to a lot of people, I get it all the time, people say, I can never write a book. I could never write a book. That's so intimidating. Journaling is a way for you to get in touch with yourself. Journaling is a way for you to have a conversation with yourself. And what you discover through the act of journaling is if you want to be able to express yourself articulately or brilliantly to other people, you first have to be able to do it to yourself. And that's what journaling allows you to do, because you get clear on what do you believe? What do you want? What do you want out of life? And I think that's another big piece too, is so often people will get focused on what they don't want. In fact, one of my coaching clients earlier today said, well, I don't want to, he was talking about public speaking. I don't want to be second guessing myself. I don't want to be this. And I said, well, I know what you don't want. Tell me what you want. And when you think about what you want, if you want to find the purpose of your life, the reason why you exist, that is inside you. It's always been inside you. You just have to ask yourself the question. When you start to ask yourself a question like that, that was the first thing I did in January of 2017. I was reading Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Brilliant book. And in the first or second chapter, he says, what is the purpose of your life? And when he asked that question, I was literally, it was like blown away. Like the blown away emoji situation happened. And I was so excited. I grabbed a notebook and a pen and I wrote, the purpose of my life is to help people find their purpose in life. I said, that's it. I'm not writing horror stories. I'm going to help people find their purpose in life. I'm going to call the book Whiskey and Yoga. And I had this level of clarity and I had this urgency to me because I realized there is an internal compass that we all have, a North Star that we get to align ourselves to. And it speaks to our passion. It speaks to the part of us that we've always dreamed about bringing more to the forefront, but have been reduced by the needs of the outside world, whether it's job, whether it's family or whatever. And when you tap into that and wake it up, the world changes. And for me, if you don't have an idea of what that is, start journaling with yourself, start asking yourself questions and see what answers you get.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. You said before we can speak or communicate to the world, we have to learn how to speak or communicate to ourselves.
Absolutely.
That was brilliant. That was worth us showing here today. And I tell people all the time, journal, 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 and they roll their eyes at me. But that was such a wonderful and powerful statement.
Thank you. What you write is what you invite. If you want to dream and you have dreams that you want to accomplish, if you can't express them clearly to yourself, how can you ever hope to see them come to life? Like you have to. That's the power of journaling to me, and that's part of my journaling process has deepened my sense as being an author as well, because now I have ideas and I've put those ideas out in journal. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. I can turn this into a story. I can turn this into a blog, whatever the case may be. So it's journaling. That ability to have a conversation and communicate with yourself is a pathway to liberation.
I agree. So another page from your book, and it begins with this. It says, I was talking with someone the other day. At one point during the conversation, this person made the comment, but my mind was wandering. I thought to myself, that isn't true. Your mind wasn't wandering. Your awareness was wandering. How does the distinction between the mind wandering and awareness wandering impact our understanding of mindfulness?
It's a beautiful example. I think I remember who that was too. I am fortunate that I have a brilliant workout partner. Every morning we meet at the gym. He's a plastic surgeon. He owns strip malls that, provide employment for people. I mean, he's really an outstanding businessman. And every time we go to the gym, he is distracted immediately. Like something just happens, he's distracted. The mind doesn't water. It's a misconception. It's a poor use of terms. It's like I've heard someone say recently, they were talking to a psychiatrist and said, well, the person had a nervous breakdown. And the person listening said, well, what nerve broke? And it said, oh, it's a figure of speech. Well, it's not a figure of speech.
Uh-huh.
You are saying something that isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
When we say our mind is wandering, it's not true. Our awareness is wandering.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually led to my second book, The Lighthouse Keeper, because in Whiskey and Yoga, I actually make mention of the lighthouse keeper. This idea was born out of my practice as a yoga instructor, where I would go to my classes sometimes and say, I just wanted them to think about life differently. I said, your life is a movie and you are the lead actor, but you're also the director because what you focus on and the meaning you give what you focus on dictates if you're living a comedy, a tragedy, a drama, an adventure, a romance. It's completely up to the meaning that you give something. And then one day I went into class and I said, your mind is an ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Mind is this huge ocean. And your awareness is a lighthouse. And most people create habits for their weeks, sometimes even for their months. And the lighthouse just goes around the same pattern every day. And I'm like, well, this is my life. If you want to take control of your life, if you want to practice mindfulness, you have to become conscious of where you're directing that awareness. And so it's not the mind wandering, it's our attention or our awareness wandering. Once you understand that relationship and you start to say, okay, well, it is my mind is part of me. It's not me. My awareness, that's the deeper part of who I am. That's the deeper part of my truth. Because you and I can both look at something. We can look at a pot of flowers. And if I've just lost a loved one, it could make me think very sad thoughts. If it's the weekend after Valentine's Day for you, it could think you make beautiful thoughts. Same experience, different reaction. And that's because of the meaning we give it and the awareness that we assign when we focus on it. So to me, it's mindfulness is breaking the patterns of monotony in our day and starting to bring ourselves to the present moment, to not be on autopilot 24/7 and to start live and noticing what's happening in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's a practical way that we could disrupt our distractions and we can get our awareness back on track?
One of the simple things I do, I still do it to this day, is every time I have a Ford F-150 pickup truck, and every time I get in the truck, I turn the AC on or off because I used to just leave it on all the time. And then I actually owe this to my mom because she would turn her AC off and she'd say, oh, I heard from so-and-so on the radio that it wastes the battery. It wastes the battery if you leave the AC on. I said, well, it's just turning the car on, then the battery. And it's okay. So every time instead of just getting in and starting it, I start the car and then I consciously have to think about, let me turn the AC on. And it's just a little simple note. It's the same. If you take the same route to work every single day, what ends up happening is your conscious mind shuts off because your subconscious mind knows the route that it's going. And so you don't have to think about it. So you can be listening to a podcast, you can be listening to the radio, you can be thinking about a meeting you have to have, and you get to work, and then suddenly you're like, well, how did I get here? Gosh, the trip's already over. If you want to break that up, take a different path to work. Take one where you have to pay attention, where you have to be present in the car, whether there's traffic, whether there's construction, whatever the case may be. But that pattern disruption is going to bring more of your senses into the present moment.
I love it. I was missing some of my words. You'll have to help me. But back clarifying what you said in that simple tool or framework to actually drive a different way to work, or a different way to the grocery store, or a different way to go to your friend's house. That's so simple, but it does just wake up your awareness.
Absolutely. And it is. It's so simple. I mean, there are times when I'm like, I can go this way. No, I'm going to go this way this time. I'm going to go this way and see what this does.
I agree with your mother. I'm a wife of a mechanic, and I turn everything off on my car because I know when you turn the key, it pulls from the battery from that firing of, so I do the same thing. Everything turns off. So there's a chapter in here named Mental Something. I didn't write down the whole thing. You talk, I thought this is so good. We have to talk about this. We have to talk about complacency in an area of time, or, different things that you had mentioned, like, oh, I'll wait till tomorrow. Or there's that feeling of being content. Our internal conversation is holding us back because we're going, it's okay, I can do this tomorrow. And then you said complacency's greatest ally is comfort.
Yeah.
Would you just unpack that, please?
Sure. So it kind of goes back to taking the same route to work and doing the same patterns, to have a life full of patterns where it's how efficiently can I get through my day? How efficiently can I do all these things that I set myself up to do? Because then I've checked off all my things on my to-do list. Yay. Well, what happens? The next day you have more things to do. We don't stretch ourselves. I mean, people don't challenge themselves to grow. And all growth occurs outside your comfort zone. If you want to play small, then you're not going to expand. I believe we're all eternal beings. And by necessity, that journey requires constant and never-ending improvement and growth. I mean, you just have to. And if you play small because you get overcome by what the media is telling you or what social media is telling you or those things, you say, well, I'm just going to kind of stay in my lane. That's a very safe life. And it provides you the certainty and security of not stretching yourself and not taking risks. And it can be very comfortable, but there's no growth. And everything on this planet grows or it dies. I mean, you can go to any, I mean, especially now we're in springtime, everything grows or everything dies. Be on the choice of on the growing side where everything grows and challenge yourself. And it is uncomfortable. In fact, I mean, I've had this conversation with my daughter. I've had this conversation with other people. When you realize all growth occurs outside your comfort zone, you want to be used to being uncomfortable. And that was probably one of the greatest lessons I learned in the military was at some point you have to just enjoy, whether it's being up at 3 a.m. and it's raining, or I remember Christmas Day in Somalia was probably 108 degrees and I'm out on a food convoy, but I was like, this is awesome. I'm helping people. So yeah, all growth occurs outside your comfort zone, and comfort and complacency can be life drains for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly the quote that I wrote down here. All growth occurs outside of your comfort zone. So now that we have this awareness that all growth happens outside of our comfort zone, would you give us some creative ideas to where we could help ourselves to be aware of being in the present?
So let's first define what we mean by being present. Being present means all my attention, all my awareness is in this moment now. In other words, I'm not reflecting on a conversation I had 2 hours ago. I'm not thinking about a fight I had with a family member or a coworker. I'm not thinking about, I can't wait for this weekend because of whatever's happening this weekend. It's about being here now, about appreciating this moment now. To get there, it's not mental gymnastics. It's stopping to appreciate stillness. And the best way to do this is through your breath. Just take a few calm breaths, because no one ever thinks about the breath I'm going to take in 5 minutes. But you come into the breath now and you can find presence. And that just slows everything down. And that's what turned me into a yoga instructor, was my first class where I felt stillness. what is that? And realize, that's me being present. That's me not having to-do lists running through my brain or reflecting on something that happened that I could have done differently in this conversation. That was me fully being present. Well, I want to do more of that. So the breath is an easy way. Journaling is an easy way too, because journaling, again, brings you to a point of focus and focusing clarity on trying to articulate your thoughts. It's amazing to me how even some people who are the best speakers have trouble putting their thoughts down on paper because it's not the same. It's not necessarily the same thing. But as you develop that, journaling forces you to be present too. So journaling and breathing are two of the best pieces. Pattern interrupt, just doing a different route is another great tool as well.
Excellent frameworks. Excellent, excellent. My particular passion, a calling from God, is to help people live spiritually brave with a fundamental focus on ascension, stepping beyond into heaven, stepping through the doorway of Christ into Him beyond the veil. In your book, Becoming One with Christ,
Yep.
The Lessons of King David, you unveil this profound biblical insight that may tend to get missed. And I caught it in there. It says the notion that King David did not ascend to heaven. Did not. Because I highlight it in pink. I go, yes, yes, yes. So would you elaborate for us? Give us some more little carrots, because your book is coming out when?
May 29th.
May 29th.
Yeah.
Why this revelation is so important for us to hear and how it reshapes our understanding of faith and salvation.
What a beautiful question. Thank you so much for asking it. All three of the Abrahamic faiths believe in a Messiah. Two of those assign that title to Jesus, Islam and Christianity. The Jewish faithful believe the Messiah comes from the house of David. When you look at the Davidic covenant outlined in 2 Samuel, David, as the second king of Israel, is told by the prophet, I don't think it's Samuel, it's either Samuel or Nathan, but he's told, the Lord says, when you are sleeping with your ancestors, your offspring will rise up and establish an everlasting kingdom and your eternal throne. So in that, we inherently can understand if David is sleeping with his ancestors and his offspring, meaning Jesus, is going to establish the everlasting kingdom, David's not in that kingdom, clearly. When you start to look at when David then sleeps with Bathsheba and has her husband killed and breaks the covenant and is now told, your house is going to live and die by the sword and you have turned your house against you, that's not just Solomon. That's not just Absalom. He is a foil now for the Messiah, because there must be a reconciliation between a broken promise to a human being for an eternal kingdom and the offspring who fulfills that promise. When you look at that now, the Psalms become alive with consequence, because not only does David prophesy Christ's crucifixion hundreds of years before the Romans invent it as a form of torture, but he also calls everyone is a liar. The second king of Israel is condemning humanity so that Christ may save everyone. Mm-hmm. So then he goes through his life, he dies, and when you get into the New Testament, there are 18, maybe even 24 references to Jesus as the son of David. We find out in the book of Acts, David does not ascend to heaven, and we hear the same verse that's been repeated now. This is the third time it's been repeated. And I think the quote is, the Lord said to my Lord, or for David did not ascend to heaven, and yet he said, the Lord said to my Lord, meaning David speaking under the spirit of the big cheese, to the Messiah, Jesus, sit at my right hand while I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And we know the footstool is the planet Earth.
Yes, it is.
So if you think about it in the context, one, what do we have? We have a broken promise that somehow must be fulfilled by God, by Christ. And that promise is to a human being of the perpetuation of his eternal kingdom and throne. validated and fulfilled through his offspring, his son, Jesus Christ. When you start to now look at what happens after the resurrection, how does Christianity advance? I would contend the spirit of David is what guides Christianity's advance because it is making the enemies of the Messiah a footstool for the Messiah's feet. And that takes into then how does, if you look at the early Christian church, people were doing crazy things. Like people were tying metal balls around their ankles and walking in public as a tribute to Christ for his sacrifice. We know through the Spanish Inquisition and other things that there were some pretty malicious things that were done to people who were deemed not to be believing. And so there's this bizarre relationship. The whole point of writing that book is to believe in the story of Christ is to believe that we are in the story of the Bible. I mean, I'm not sure there's another way that you can reconcile that. And if that's true, then what is the human pathway out of the Bible? Well, it's King David, because we get to the end of the Bible, David or Jesus on the last page of Revelation says, I am the root and the offspring of David. I am the beginning of David and I am the end of David. Well, what does that mean if David is a human being? What does it say about him? One, it says he must accept Christ as his offspring and his root. But if that's David's journey as a human, then isn't that the journey for every human? Because we know Christ says, no one comes to the Father except through me. So the whole title of the book is, in order to become one with Christ, that to me is the pathway towards ultimate ascension up Jacob's ladder.
Okay.
It's also, and you think about it though, if David must, in Jeremiah 39, I think it says, I will raise up David, like my servant, I will raise up my servant David. So if you think about not just the fulfillment of Christian doctrine, but the reconciliation of the Messianic faith of the Abrahamic religions, my contention is there must be a conscious reconciliation between King David and Christ for that to happen. And even though it's not necessarily clearly spelled out in the Bible, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be. I think it's implicit, and you see that played out more broadly, not biblically, but I would say that probably the easiest accessible way is fiction, right? There is a common theme in fiction for the son to go into the belly of the beast to rescue his father. We see it in Pinocchio. Probably the most relevant example for a modern day audience would be Luke Skywalker saving his father, Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. And I would say when you also look at, there are so many Psalms where David says to the Lord, thank you for saving me from the pit, which is hell. Then you have to start to say, okay, well then clearly that's another suggestion that David isn't in heaven. And that must mean there must be some sort of reconciliation between the two of them in order for heaven and earth to come together.
Interesting.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I've had different people, when I've talked about this, like, well, of course David ascends to heaven. He's a man after God's own heart. Not so fast. Like, let's understand what the Davidic covenant is spelling out, because it is placing the responsibility for the establishment of the eternal kingdom and David's throne on Jesus Christ. That is a very distinct component of the covenant. And it's one thing that I think people are very familiar with: the Mosaic covenant, the Noah covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. The Davidic one gets overlooked a lot because, well, there's this whole thing about God the Father. Jesus, the son of David, doesn't get a lot of airplay because I think for the Christian mind, it starts to force a reconciliation with Judaism that most people don't contemplate on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. There is a restoration, though.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
There is a restoration.
Absolutely. Well, and that's part of what the book is about too. And it's, okay, how would that happen? Because we know physically in this world, we know heaven isn't on Jupiter. Heaven's not on the other side of the moon. Well, we live in a day and age where we are starting to contemplate the reality that there are multiple universes that exist. Mm-hmm. And what would heaven be if not another universe? I mean, that just to me makes sense. It's you kind of have to start to get into science to really understand that. But I mean, we had just at the end of last year, Google created a quantum computing chip that answered a question that our fastest computers today could not solve in 10 septillion years. And what they've deduced is, well, it still has to do all those calculations, so it must be doing them in other universes. And that's kind of what I've just considered is that makes the most sense to me is heaven is just another universe or multiple universes. I can see the wheels turning.
They are turning. They are turning. I'm sitting here going, okay, what shall we open up? What shall we open up? It's interesting that the very first prophetic word that my husband gave to me is regarding God rebuilding a sure house, a destiny after his own, the same one that he said to David. And that's been my key. It's been a key to my life. Many, many things. So fascinating, the thing on the chip.
It really is. Well, and that's, I think, the challenge today is, and that's part of what I do in becoming one with Christ, is traditionally science and religion haven't played well together. And yet, Einstein even said, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And if you don't understand quantum physics, it's very hard to sort of grasp some of these ideas. If you live just in the Newtonian model of reality where you just see everything is physical, it's a shift to say, well, the quantum world is the underneath stuff that's a much deeper level. And that's kind of what I find is most fascinating for people who are very well practiced in the faith is it's an invitation to see I think the best way I can describe it biblically is Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And if you understand that as a universal light, then you're going to see everyone in that light, regardless of what they believe. Because it's not about what they believe, it's about what you believe. And for me, I believe his light is universal. That's a quantum kind of idea. I don't have to look at them and say, oh, well, that person's Muslim, so I'm going to judge them on their beliefs, even though they can't help culturally how they were brought up. Or I'm going to judge this person on how they look, or I'm going to judge this person on how much money they have. When you start to understand, well, if Christ's light is universal, if he has authority over heaven and earth after his resurrection, then every single human being I see is a reflection of Christ in some way. And it's up for me to make that connection regardless of what they believe, because my conviction is he rules the kingdom of heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you say that he ruled it after his resurrection.
And he expressly says after his resurrection, I have been given all authority over heaven and on earth.
Uh-huh.
So and that's part of what I contend too, is it's not spoken at all from what I can tell in common Christian theology today. If David is promised an eternal kingdom through the line of success, he's promised a dynasty of kings, then there has to be some sort of succession of the throne in order for Christ to ascend to become the King of Kings. And we don't.
But he already is.
But I guess my point I'm making is, what is the succession? What is the succession from between David as the recipient of the promise to Christ as Christ establishes the kingdom? That's kind of the point of the book, is there must be a reconciliation where David says Christ is on the throne of David. And I acknowledge that his supremacy as the Messiah. And I think it's not talked about because it's not written. It's not a component that's explicitly stated in the Bible. There's the covenant, there's the promise of the dynasty of kings, and then there's what is the consequence? How does that restoration take place if David doesn't ascend to heaven and Christ has established the eternal kingdom and the everlasting throne?
But by Christ's gift and his resurrection, all of it was forgiven. All of it was taken care of. All of it on the whole eternal line, from beginning to end, on the eternal line in every age.
All I'm saying to you, Kristen, is part of the premise of my book is for heaven and earth to be for a new heaven and earth to come out, which is how the Bible ends. I'm saying David is the anchor point. If he doesn't ascend to heaven, David is the anchor point for Christ's return. Because you have to, for me, it's how do you finish the Bible story? How do you finish the Bible story? And it's not even, I can't even take credit for the idea. I think if you ever read the Left Behind series 20 years ago, in the 12th, so for the audience, the Left Behind series, if you haven't read it, was written by two pastors. I think it started in the late 1990s and they finished around 2006 or 2008. But the rapture occurs and the people who are left behind have to deal with the Antichrist, who is this European leader. And then the 12th book of the series, King David is resurrected. And then Christ comes and heaven and earth is reconciled.
I'm still thinking.
I can see the wheels are turning.
The wheels are turning, because Christ, when I opened up this question, stepping beyond the veil, Christ's door is to step through the veil that was torn.
Right.
So therefore, we can experience heaven now.
I don't disagree with you.
Huh?
I'm saying that reconciliation changes the earth.
I agree. It's the restoration of all things. So when we reconcile ourselves to who we really are in him, then then we'll know that we are responsible to clean up the mess that we made.
Yeah. I think we're talking the same language.
Yeah. That's why I was kind of listening and listening. Yeah. Listening. So yeah, fascinating. I haven't heard it from that. Just to throw a little interest out there. So David happens to be in my immediate cloud of witnesses. Romans 12, about that there's a cloud of witnesses. Everybody has a closer, like friends, tutors, teachers, governors that help to grow us up in our sonship. And so David happens to be in my immediate cloud of witnesses. I wrote about him with some very interesting encounters in my first book.
Beautiful. I love that.
I have a final statement here in a call to action. We know that your book is coming out May 29th. And where can people, I will put everything in the show notes so they can find you easily and connect with you. But I would like you to actually say it. Where could they connect with you and find you and your book?
Sure. So all my books are available on my website, davidrichardsauthor.com. You can follow me on Instagram at davidrichardsauthor. And then the book will be on sale on Barnes & Noble and Amazon on the 20th.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So if someone is listening right now and they feel like they're stuck, they might even think about what we've talked about. It says, yep, my awareness has been going round and round and round in the lighthouse, right? And it could be their faith, their relationships, their career. What would you say is a really good beginning place, an initial step to take in order to break free, to bring forth some change so they can embrace their divine purpose and renew clarity and passion?
I would say the first thing is get in your heart, because if we get too much in our head, we can overanalyze and that leads to stagnation. Getting in our heart, the heart knows the way. And it's a matter of feeling. What feeling do you want to feel? And if you start to ask yourself that question, it becomes clear. Well, I want to feel joy. I want to feel bliss. I want to feel love. I want to, how do I feel that? And it's not about finding it outside you. It's about becoming it inside you. It's about bringing that inside you to life. Bring that love, bring that joy, bring that compassion, that gratitude, whatever it is. That's the other big piece that we haven't even really talked about is gratitude, because you can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. You can't be grateful and anxious. And when you can stop and appreciate even the smallest interaction with another human being, that's a beautiful piece. And the more you find gratitude in your life, the more you're going to be grateful for. And there's a great quote from the Tony Robbins community that where focus goes, energy flows. Mm-hmm. So what you focus on, you are going to attract into your life. It's unavoidable. If you, just like my client earlier today, my coaching client, if you focus on second guessing yourself, you are going to second guess yourself. If you focus on what's wrong, you are always going to find what's wrong. Focus on the beauty in your life. Focus on the joy. Focus on the things that make you feel full and alive. Because the more you bring that feeling to life inside you, the more you're radiating that out to other people for them to experience as well.
Very good. Very good. Would you pray for us?
Yes, absolutely. I would just say that in this time today where we live in a world of uncertainty, by coming inside and finding that light, that spark, the kingdom within us, we know that Christ is already victorious and Christ is always victorious. And as soon as we remember that, life becomes easier and life becomes more beautiful and we become closer to him in every sense of the word. Mm-hmm. In his name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for spending this time with us today, David.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And I'm glad we dug deeper than I expected into becoming one with Christ. But I think that book is meant to remind people that the kingdom is within you and that journey is within you.
It is very much so. And that's a wonderful place for us to let it all sit there and muse and marinate in our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. What did you learn? Where did God just touch you in your heart tremendously? What got pinpointed by David's story, his testaments to resilience and leadership, and his own spiritual awakening? We hope that it has inspired you to rethink success and rediscover your purpose. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message of reclaiming executive presence, living a faith-driven purpose, and transforming leadership. Remember his new book, Becoming One with Christ. Head over to the show notes for easy links and connections. Don't forget to follow us and for more inspiring content, and subscribe to never miss an episode. Thank you once again for listening. Until next time, keep living spiritually brave. I'll see you then. Bye now.